welcome to ADL's Never Is Now student panel on how we became and continue to be changemakers in our schools and communities. My name is Katie Gates, and I'm a first-year public relations student at the University of Georgia. Tonight, I am joined by Darya Goldenberg, a first-year student at Leiden University in the Netherlands, Julia Schuers, a high school student in Connecticut, and Asher Zummel, a high school student in New York. Over the next 40-ish minutes, we will be discussing our experiences, sharing best practices and lessons learned, and addressing some topics that are important for you to keep in mind as a fellow young changemaker. During the last 15 to 20 minutes, we will shift things over to you and answer your questions. So feel free to submit those in this chat throughout the panel, and we will try our very best to get to as many as we possibly can during the Q&A. Also, please remember that if you are a high school student or a high school educator, one of the many perks of registering for Never Is Now student track is that you've been given special access to BINA, ADL's digital, interactive anti-Semitism education course for high school students that helps to build empathy and allyship. So be sure to check that out as well. Now let's kick off our discussion by getting to know each other better and sharing a bit about our changemaker journeys. I'll start things off and then hand it over to the other panelists. So for me, I actually got my start in change-making spaces through local political campaigns in the area of youth outreach and engagement. I started working for now Congresswoman Carolyn Bourdeaux's 2020 campaign for Georgia's 7th Congressional District. And from there, I matriculated to Senator Warnock's campaign during the runoff election. My work really centered around digital communications, particularly through platforms that were frequently used by young people. So that's how you got videos on your TikTok For You page encouraging you to get out and vote. And it sounds silly, but the data show that these kind of creative new age outreach efforts yielded some of the highest turnout of young voters in Georgia that the state had ever seen. And no matter what the outcome of the election was, to me, that in itself was a victory, that we had engaged and empowered young people to get involved, to organize for change, and for candidates and a future they believe in. From there, I transitioned into more of the kind of grassroots work that I do now. In the spring of my senior year, I started Students for DEI account on Instagram, in response to a local group of parents who were planning on attending our next school board meeting to speak out against our diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI program. I was just overwhelmed by the responses from students sharing their experiences with discrimination in schools and advocating fearlessly for themselves, their peers, their teachers, and their right to learn in a classroom where every student's unique background and voice are welcomed and appreciated. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Darya.
Hi everybody, my name is Darya Goldenberg. I'm a student at Leiden University, a first-year student. I actually just moved to the Netherlands. I lived most of my life in Romania, and I moved to start my bachelor in international relations and organizations. In regards to my activism journey, I started being active in my Jewish community from a younger age, but when it comes to actually being active in advocacy, I started at the beginning of high school. And my first experience was with the European Union of Jewish Students, an organization that brings together students from all over Europe in their own unions, but also to give them a platform in order to speak about problems of anti-Semitism on campus or anti-Semitism in general as European Jews, which helped me a lot in order to actually connect with Jews all around Europe. Romania has a very small community, unfortunately. So being able to meet fellow activists of my age was a wonderful experience. Around that same time, I actually got involved in a teen-led NGO called Girl Up Romania in order to fight for gender equality, since that is also an issue I'm involved in and passionate about. So on the one hand, I had gotten engaged and started being involved in Jewish advocacy. And on the second hand, I started being involved in gender equality and educating Romanian teens in what sexual education means and human trafficking and all that, those issues that concern us as teenagers, but also as citizens of our country.
Thank you so much, Darya. I think that now we're going to go over to Julia.
Hello, everybody. I'm Julia Schuers. I'm an 11th grader based in Connecticut. And my activism journey, which has been not necessarily a straight line, started when I was quite young. I was coming of age. I was in my middle school years during the 2016 election. So I grew up in a town that was incredibly politically diverse. I grew up in a town that was incredibly racially diverse. And when I was in 6th grade, my family moved to a small colonial white suburban town farther outside New Haven. And that was the thing that for me really triggered my involvement in activism, because it was the first time I was around people with really different core beliefs from my family and the people I was around. It was the first time I ever experienced real anti-Semitism. And it was also at a climax of our country's, I would say, modern political partisanship. And this event was, I think, the thing that really, or this congruence of events was the thing that led me towards activism in the ways that I contribute to it today. So it led me towards the Anti-Defamation League. I have been, I think for about 4 years, a teen trainer with Connecticut's Teen Trainer Anti-Defamation League program. So we work with local synagogues and high schools to educate local Jewish communities on how to handle anti-Semitism, but also how to tackle events of anti-Semitism or forms of bias or discrimination in the area. So I'm involved in the Anti-Defamation League's program and have been for a while. It's an incredible program that's done a lot for me in my advocacy. It's provided me with a lot of mentorships that I've been able to take to other forms of activism. So aside from various speech givings at certain marches and involvements in activism through certain clubs, most recently, I've been involved in a lot of local politics. So I was involved in our student effort to change our school's racist mascot, which was for me a really revolutionary process in learning about policymaking and change making. I've also been involved in our school's Board of Education elections and critical race theory battle, which has been ongoing, and just faced just had an election recently. So for me, my activist journey is ongoing. It hasn't stopped. I hope it continues. And it has been taking the skills I've learned to put into other projects.
Thank you so much, Julia. And last but not least, we've got Asher.
Thanks, Katie. I'm Asher Zummel. I'm a high school senior at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School in New York, and I would say I've pretty much always been interested in civic engagement, but it was really during my freshman year of high school when I decided I wanted to get involved. Honestly, I just finished watching Parks and Rec on Netflix and thought, yeah, I could do that. So one day after school, I decided to go to my local city council office and say, I know I have no experience, but I'd love to work here, volunteer, whatever it may be, and I'll do it for free. Slight tangent and something I learned along the way, pay your interns were worth it. But anyway, I worked there 3 days a week after school, answering phones, filing things, and learning how an office works. But after about a year, I stopped because that plus homework, plus sports, and trying to have a social life in high school was just too much. But I loved the experience so much that my best friend and I decided that we wanted to start a nonpartisan political action club at our school. In this club, we connect students regardless of their political ideology with volunteering opportunities on different political campaigns. We recently just had a phone bank for the Virginia governor race where we had students making calls for both Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin. But the caveat of being in this club is that you have to sit down and have conversations about why you want to be civically engaged. We don't ask anyone to talk about why they support specific issues or candidates. We just want to really hear why everyone wants to be involved and connect with each other and build friendships predicated from a place of respect and form those connections as like-minded individuals. But during my summers, I spent a lot of time organizing for local congressional races, making digital ads and working on communications. And eventually I co-launched a nationwide Jewish political action group for the Biden campaign called Jews for Joe, where I ran the high school branch. And at Jews for Joe, we tried to flip the narrative that we as young people aren't civically engaged. So we held youth-led senior citizen voter outreach, particularly targeting New York and Florida voters, where there are large populations of Jewish voters. And finally, this past summer, I had the privilege to intern at the Anti-Defamation League, where amongst other things, I worked on the From the Front Lines podcast that focuses on the ADL's efforts to combat anti-Semitism and hate, available across all streaming platforms. Shout out Scott Richmond. It's a really great podcast to check out. But in all honesty, my experience really 100% has been overwhelmingly positive, yet I definitely faced some challenges too, and I look forward to getting into that with all of you. But that's what's so great about being politically active as a teenager is that there are just so many learning opportunities. And through it all, I've made friends with similar interests and passions whom I love and am so grateful for. So as cheesy as it may sound and as rewarding as civic engagement can be, really it's about 10% reward, 90% people telling me to take their name off phone banking lists for political campaigns that we're working on. But the best part of my journey so far has been the friends I've made along the way. And I couldn't be happier to say that I found my people through being civically engaged. And that's why I'm so excited to be on this panel tonight and speak with you all. So thank you.
Yeah, it's clear that there is just so much experience here from, people as young as us, and just a lot of wisdom to learn from each other. It sounds too like we have some similar experiences. So I'd love to kind of just dive a little bit deeper into that. So if we each had to choose one best practice and then one lesson learned from our experience, what would they be? Julia, we're going to start with you this time.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to start with my lesson learned because I think it's really cliche, but it's a lesson that I've just taken with me in basically everything I do, which is pick your battles. I think that everybody on this panel and probably anybody that's interested in activism has a lot to say and a lot of intelligent things to say and a really finite amount of time and energy to give towards things. I think probably the epitome of this for me has been social media. If I could give one piece of advice to teenagers looking to get involved in social action, it is do not fall down a rabbit hole of engaging in fights on the internet. I think that there are a lot of passionate people with passionate voices, and this is not being able to selectively dedicate your energy towards things is something that really, I think, eats people up. I think that even if you examine that on like a macro level, you can apply that to movements. So I was involved in our mascot process and changing our mascot, and there are thousands of people in the town with thousands of opinions, and just about 10 people that really make this decision and needed to be convinced and needed to be talked to and negotiated with. And I think that if activists can take with them this idea that their energy and their time is valuable and trying to fine tune where they should dedicate that and how they should dedicate that. I think that's what activism is locating who you need to convince, who you need to talk to, who you need to negotiate with, and finding that person. So picking your battles, knowing that your energy and your time is valuable and allocating that efficiently and productively is, I think, the lesson that I have learned and I hope people take with them. In terms of a best practice, I think that this is a little bit of a more nuanced take, but there is this idea that activism is being sort of a funnel for a voice or for a movement or being a microphone with which to speak. And something that I have found is some of the most intimate and powerful forms of activism come with just learning and spending time researching and thinking. So a best practice would frankly be, in my opinion, to learn about the world. I think spending time reading, thinking, talking to people that are involved with the activism that you're engaging with is so valuable. Firstly, I think it just makes you a more credible individual to talk with if you understand history and context. But I also think it makes you a more critical thinker. I think being able to read and think and learn about the context with which you're acting in is something that can make you more deliberate in the ideas that you believe and the way that you act on them in the world. I also think that being able to evolve and to challenge both yourself and your own ideas, but also the movements that you participate in and the people around you is the way that movements evolve and that ideas evolve. And I think that especially as young people, you can progress ideas and you can push movements forward by being a force that is informed, that is accountable and holds the people around you accountable. So in terms of a best practice, I would say read a book. I would say learn about the movements that you're involved in and interested in. Follow up on the news, do your best to talk to people, understand how activism and the causes that you're interested in really play out in the world. I think that that's the advice that I would have loved to hear and that I take really seriously. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia. That is just some great advice. Next, we're going to head over to Asher.
Oh, well, I feel like Julia got the best one reading a book. I didn't even think of that. That's so good. But, I feel like there's so many best practices. A really good one I learned is how to use a fax machine. But by far the best practice I would say that I learned is self-advocacy. And I think what that means to me is that you are taking your time as a student to be engaged. And part of that, like Julia touched on, is prioritizing your needs. But all of that means advocating for yourself. For example, I know what I can do. So it's my job to make that clear because nobody's going to know that for me and make those decisions for me. But you also need to go about it in a polite and respectful way. So find a teacher, find a parent, find someone to teach you email etiquette, learn how to talk in professional work settings. That all goes a really long way. My mom loved to drill me on email etiquette. I'm happy to say it worked. So thanks, Mom. But, one of the hardest things I had to do when I was working in an internship was telling my boss that I couldn't work unpaid overtime. because it's just not something that I felt comfortable doing. I felt like I was putting in a lot of time, putting in a lot of effort, and it's just not something I felt comfortable doing. And I think my boss ended up actually respecting me a lot more for it, because I, as a student, went up to this professional in a professional workplace and said, listen, this just isn't something I can do. You either have to like compensate me for my time, or I just can't work these hours. And we ended up reaching a really fair agreement. And I'm proud of myself for doing that. And I'm really grateful for the adults who helped me learn how to do that. But it also means playing into your skills. For example, like in terms of social media, I realized that I can make like good videos. So when I was working on a congressional campaign in New Jersey, Stephanie Schmidt's campaign, I offered to help make digital ads for their social media accounts. And they actually ended up being really successful. A few days before the election, the ad I made about her opponent's response to the coronavirus went semi-viral on Facebook and helped generate a lot of support for her campaign. And I would say that the best lesson I learned is don't try and do it all. If you're in a position where you're helping other people or you're managing other people, learn to delegate. And if you're in a position where you're being managed or you're participating in something, learn to step up and say what you can do, say what you're comfortable doing. Don't be afraid to say you're good at something, or even that you want to try something. Like we're all young people. We're all just, getting involved now. It's a learning experience. We should all be trying new things and learning new things. Don't be afraid to ask people to shadow them. When I was at Jews for Joe, we decided that we would start selling merch to raise money. I have no idea how to do that. I just asked someone if they felt comfortable doing that. And we turned out like there were plenty of people who did that. They set up a website for us. They, advertised the merch and everything. And it ended up being pretty successful. But learn to say, I need help with something, ask questions, ask for help, and be honest about what you can and can't do. And I promise that you'll feel so much more comfortable handling whatever comes your way. If you're just honest about what you can and can't do, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Absolutely. Very wise. And it's really all about balance in this kind of work. Now we're going to hand things over to Darya.
So I'll just add, I feel like Julia and Asher gave great examples of lessons and practices we learn as young activists, but I would like to add the filter of, or the layer of human interaction. I feel like connecting and being able to make connections with people in various fields, not only the activist field, is great and it helps you a lot. So if there is an organization or especially grassroots organizations, I feel like it's so important getting on the same level with people that are there on the field doing the work with the issues that you're most passionate about is very important. And it also gives you a great deal of information because you're talking to people who have the information and who have the experience, maybe more than you do. And they're usually, in my past interactions, they're so glad to help you and see young people get involved. And seeing their journey and helping you find your own route and your own way is one of the things they're the most glad to do. So I feel like finding the grassroots organization that is there for not only Jewish advocacy. I mean, there are a lot of great Jewish organizations, but you can find great organizations for everything you're passionate about. If it's climate change, then you're going to find organizations that advocate for taking measures against climate change. And that's the lesson I'd like to add, just being able to find the people and connecting to them, because it's all about the people, in my honest opinion.
Yeah, and I think that really, kind of the overarching theme of all of that advice is, communication is key, as cliche as it is. With the nature of this field, things are constantly changing. A new crisis seems to always be around the corner, and it's a lot. It's a lot to keep up with. One of my favorite professors, he likes to say, there's no such thing as over communication during a crisis. And that mantra, I think, applies not just to times of crisis, but really every aspect of this work that we do. As young people and as a young woman, I know especially, I know that I can feel very self-conscious about overstepping my bounds or coming across as annoying or too much. But with that attitude, nothing is ever going to get done. Community organizing and change making is very collaborative work, and it requires these constant, open, honest lines of communication. And in the interest of full transparency, that is something I actually struggle with a lot. So it's a very intentional effort that I have to make to constantly work on and improve those skills, but it is so worth it. As far as lessons learned, I'd have to say that sometimes we don't get the outcome that we desired, but we still create change that is needed. So like last August, I live in Forsyth County, Georgia. So it's the suburbs, but it's very more of the exurbs. So we were set to return to school with no mask mandate as coronavirus cases continued to climb. I petitioned our superintendent for a mask mandate, posting an open letter after my original email received no response. It received a great amount of support online from students and attracted the attention of some local news outlets such as the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and 11 Live News, and still nothing. No response, no policy changes, no mask mandate. And it would have been really easy to call that initiative a failure. But although the superintendent didn't agree on the need for a mask mandate, the letter highlighted the students' recognition of the importance of universal masking. So we were able to kind of take that enthusiasm and redirect it into community action. And we were able to kind of host a donation drive and collect enough masks, hand sanitizer, and cleaning supplies to last our high school a full semester without teachers having to dip into their own pockets to pay for it. And was that the goal that we had originally set out to accomplish? No. But did it accomplish the goal of making our return to school safer? Yes, absolutely. So it's just, sometimes you kind of got to take it and redirect. And redirecting into our next question, one of the things that I'm thinking about as a young change maker, and I'm sure all of you are too, is how adults can play a role in our efforts and how to navigate kind of challenging those policies and norms that have been set by those in authority at our educational institutions and beyond. How can adults support young change makers like us in helping create social change in our schools and communities? And I know some of us have kind of already touched on that in our answers. So Asher, let's start with you.
Thanks, Katie. Well, I think it goes both ways between adults supporting students and students listening to and respecting the adults in our communities, because trust is sort of a two-way street. Like, as students, we're not going to get anything done unless we have the support of certain adults in our communities. And learning that has also been part of the process. But I would say listen to the concerns and the needs of the students. And also, like, as students, we need to listen to the expectations, concerns, and needs of the adults, because we need to be able to compromise and work with each other. But I think adults need to do a good job of keeping students on task if they're supportive of the agenda and really being those role models in our lives. For example, at my school this semester, I realized that I was interested in economics as well as climate change policy. So with one of my friends, we set up an independent study that's exploring the role of government subsidies as the United States is transitioning to more renewable energy and how those subsidies are going to new green tech startups, but also to companies like BP and Exxon and Shell. And we, per request of the teacher, actually, are also drafting recommendations for our school on how to be a more eco-friendly place in terms of reducing the use of cars to school, limiting student parking, incentivizing more students to take the bus, things like that. Teachers should be integrating civics into curriculums. Like in my chem class, we just did a project on the chemistry of the Flint water crisis while we learned about the political ramifications of that. But also, like, I had the opportunity to attend a semester away program during my junior year of high school called the School for Ethics and Global Leadership, which is a need-blind, civic-oriented school for 24 high school juniors that are really interested in learning about how the world works. We get to talk to amazing guest speakers. Like, we talked to Republican congressmen who supported the amicus brief to the Supreme Court that wanted to overturn the election results. And we also talked to people like Senator Cory Booker, who believe the exact opposite. So if that's something you're interested in, applications are due December 15th. But really, it's just adults need to be supporting ways for students to get civically engaged in their communities and allowing them to take advantage of programs like Siegel, the School for Ethics and Global Leadership, take advantage of things like independent studies in school, and just really be supportive and be flexible, especially during the pandemic when we hear about how adults are now in schools trying to be more flexible and more inclusive in curriculums. Listen to the students' needs and concerns and find ways to bring student voices into those conversations and really have student-led change on the institutional level within schools. Also hold resume workshops and like that. None of us have any idea how to do that.
Professional development, definitely a huge thing. Yeah, those were some really great points. Now I think we're going to go over to Darya.
Yeah, I completely agree with Asher. I feel like I've had, honestly, in my experience, adults are usually very happy to see young people get involved, but in the same time, I feel with some adults, they don't realize the fact that we're the next generation of leaders, and sometimes they hold too strongly to their position or their leadership. So I feel like on the one hand, adults should definitely be aware of the fact that we need to be given a platform and just be given an opportunity to grow into these positions of leadership and support our voices. It's not just enough to talk about how the young generation is going to take over. It's also important to help the young generation take over and have something to take over. And what I mean by this, we won't be leaders if there is nothing to lead. And the adults and decision makers should be aware of that, because I feel our generation has so much hope for the future, and we're so involved in trying to make a change, but in the same time there's sometimes a barrier between us and adults. Once again, usually in my case, I've met lovely adults and that were so glad to help and so glad to give me a voice and give my fellow activists a voice. But I feel like this reminder needs to be said and needs to be present for everyone that's listening and has a voice and can have a word in young activists and what they do.
Yeah, and I mean, elaborating on that, I feel like in response to like discouraging events in the news, adults are often they respond with something like, "Oh, it's too late for my generation. You know, the youth will save us." And we appreciate that show of good faith. We really, really do. But that's a lot of pressure. I love this work and I can't see myself doing anything else. But I'm 18. I've been doing this since since I was 16, while being a full-time student, while navigating all of the challenges that come with transitioning from childhood into young adulthood. So I consider myself really lucky to have had some amazing adult mentors, from former bosses, shout out Monica, to former teachers who not only taught me the practical skills that have served me so well, such as writing a press release or designing graphics, but who also instilled in me the confidence to even attempt this stuff in the first place and to keep going when things got difficult or overwhelming. And to adults, just kind of piggybacking off of what Asher said, talking about this being a two-way street, it is never too late for you if your heart is in this work. You can be mentors to young people looking to get involved if you have experience, or maybe you're the one learning for the first time in your lives how to impact change in your communities. It's not too late to jump in and take action for a better, more equitable future for us and for you. We don't need to always be waiting around for the next generation to come and fix things. You're here now, and if you think that you have the skills and the drive and the passion, or even just the willingness to learn and try, give it a shot. Find an issue you're passionate about and make it happen. I think I speak for all of us young people when I say that we'll be behind you all the way. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julia.
Yeah, so I think that this is a really interesting question because student activists face this unique problem that oftentimes the people that they are, I won't say fighting with, but are certainly trying to uproot, or the systems they're trying to uproot are often in a very hierarchical way directly above them. That's been my relationship as a high schooler that has had a lot of activism be in high school settings. And I think that sort of exemplifies a problem that I see with youth activism, which is this tendency to talk over students. A really good example of it is the critical race theory fight that is across this country right now, which is an issue that is about student education, right? It's about classrooms. And, there aren't student voices in it. And I am involved in this fight, and I can see that there are student opinions, but none of it is being centered on a local or national level. And I think that points to this issue that students face really unique barriers. They face legal barriers. They face hierarchical barriers. They don't want to speak up to their teachers, and they face things like economic or geographic barriers. So I think that organizations and adult individuals need to make a really specific effort to reach out to students, doing things like providing focus groups, involving students, really active types of conversations, inviting them to Board of Education meetings, and providing them with training. I mean, the best thing the ADL ever did for me was provide me with training. So I think that the best thing adults can do, which sounds like kind of a lofty declaration, is try your best to actively center students, or at least invite them into rooms where these discussions are being made, because there are some really unique barriers that younger people face to actually entering those conversations in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have time for one more question before we open it up to Q&A. So let's cover something that I think that a lot of people take for granted when doing this kind of work, and that is self-care, how you re-energize and continue leading this kind of work, as well as just knowing when it's best for you to take a step back. It's exhausting for many reasons. Slow-moving progress, challenging the status quo, those barriers that Julia mentioned that are, just so prevalent for young people, especially exposure and pushback from people that we don't know on social media, and keeping other students around us motivated to engage in the work, and so much more. So what are some ways that we recharge and take care of ourselves? And how do we know when it's time to take a step back or to move on to something different if that's where our hearts are? Darya, let's start with you this time.
I'm so glad, Julia, and you also mentioned social media, because honestly, I feel like most of us have a love-hate relationship. But in my case, and most of our cases, social media is such an important tool to get our message across. And in my work, Instagram has been the platform where we were able to send our message across countries, regions, world, continents, if I may say so. But when it comes to self-care, honestly, it's just about stepping away from your phone. And it might seem very cliche, but maybe deleting the app for a few days and making sure that you're taking time for yourself. Honestly, since I started activism, I feel like at one point I reached burnout, and I'm still struggling to find my passion, not necessarily passion, just energy once again, and be just as motivated as I was in the beginning without feeling tired at every step of the road. So I don't have the secret yet. I promise. Whenever I'll find the answer to burnout, I'll tell you guys. But I feel with social media, just taking a break, not trying to debate anyone in the comments, or not maybe turning off notifications and not following accounts which usually trigger you, or post content which is very sensible or might be sensible for yourself. Just having a nice evening and watching a movie that you really like. And with stepping back, that's also a very hard question, because in my case, when I'm passionate about something, I sometimes don't know when to step back. And maybe the solution to that is not necessarily stepping back, just finding a different medium for what your passion is. Maybe just finding a different tool for advocating for the issues you're passionate about. And once again, I still have a lot to learn, and I don't have the answer to everything. But when it comes to self-care and knowing when to step back, I feel like assessing everything you're going through, and maybe looking at your schedule and seeing if you're just full, that's a sign you have to take a day off or a weekend off or a week off, and just try to take care of yourself first. Because if you cannot take care of yourself, most likely you won't be able to work at your full potential and help others in your journey in activism.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, when you find that magical cure for burnout, please let me know. I think all of us could use it sometimes. Now we want to hear Julia's thoughts.
Yeah, so there's this ADL program that they run, and I've participated in a few times. It's called Julia Star, not named after me. And it teaches, we go into synagogues and to younger grades in religious school, and the lesson is just celebrate your Judaism. That is an act of defiance. It is an act of rebellion, just to fall in love with your Judaism. And it's a program I've always resonated with, I think for that reason, which is so much of activism is antagonistic, it's confrontational, it's being surrounded by violence and hatred. And what I have found, which is really, really healing, is to go back to the places that you're fighting for. So for me, doing something Jewish, spending time with my congregation is something that's really healing to me, because it does feel like an act of activism. But it also is something that's really healing. So the first piece of advice I would give is, if there's something that you really care about, reminding yourself why you're fighting for it or who you're fighting for, going to the places or to the people that are affected by your work is something that I find to be very healing and very refreshing and energizing. I think is really valuable. The other thing, just in terms of where to divert your energy and knowing when to step back, is I've found it's really good to just go to the places that you want to be in. And by that, I mean, I'm a competitive debater. I love competitive debate. And I am choosing to take my activism and try to apply it to that world. So examining equity or gender issues in competitive debate. I think going to places that you are drawn to and that you love, or those are places that will always need work, and there are always places you can improve upon. But it can also be really energizing to do work and activism in places and in communities that you care about and that you have interest in. I think that's a way not necessarily to avoid burnout, but certainly to be really engaged in it. The last piece of advice I'll give, on the cliche note, is I'm an artist, I'm a poet, and I'm a painter. And I have always found art to be an incredibly healing and equally inspiring act of activism and self-care, in that it both allows you to express yourself, but also to process and to grieve. So the last piece of advice I'd give is do a painting.
I love that, and I will definitely have to try that sometime. I'm not quite as artistically inclined, but I'll give it a shot. I think that for me, the move to college was just a really difficult adjustment in relation to organizing. Before I left, like you, Julia, I was super involved in local educational organizing, especially with my school board, and with a local group of parents who were against our county's diversity, equity, and inclusion plan because they were conflating it with critical race theory specifically. And these people, they were just absolutely relentless. And so I that sort of fight was a very, very large part of my life before I went. And for me, it was really, really hard to kind of leave it behind, picking up and moving to a new place. I just went through this period of feeling like I wasn't doing enough. I was going to my classes, I was trying to make friends, I joined the Student Government Association on my campus, but I just felt like I could have been doing more, and I could not have. I was exhausted, and that was really frustrating, until I realized that I was undergoing this major life adjustment, living in a new place, away from my parents for the first time ever, and I was doing exactly what freshmen in college should be doing during their first few months of school. And taking that sort of break really made me miss organizing and activism work, and only reinforced my knowledge that I wanted to do this work for the rest of my life. So looking back on it, it was actually a good thing. I just been going for 2 years straight, with the election and then COVID, and then now critical race theory, issue after issue. And I don't regret it at all. And I'm really proud of the work that I did with the help of some other incredible young people. But when you're just going nonstop like that, there's no chance to really think about why you're doing it all. And then this vitally important work loses some of its meaning, and that just isn't right. So I was able to spend the first few months of school just learning and listening all about the history of the Athens community and some of its unique challenges and needs, rather than just jumping in immediately and doing for the sake of doing, rather than listening and learning, where my skills could be best put to use. And now that I'm finally settled, I'm working with campus groups to get out the vote in 2022. I'll be serving as director of community service in my sorority. And I hope to really work to repair relationships between the Pan-Hellenic community and the university at large, and traditionally underserved communities of Athens, Georgia. And of course, continuing my work around educational equity with Students for DEI. So I guess it all kind of worked out. Asher, how about you?
Well, I would say the best advice that I got was, if you truly hate something, quit. We are all young enough to make these kinds of choices in terms of our interests and areas we want to explore in terms of civic engagement. And the beauty of that is we aren't beholden to a particular job or career or anything like that yet. We're still figuring out what we want to do. And we are all, as young people, choosing to be active. And what that means is, again, learning how to prioritize our needs in the context of this work. And it should never feel like it's your needs versus the needs of an issue, because whatever time you're dedicating to something, I promise that's more than enough. Whatever time you can give is more than enough. And as students, we shouldn't be sacrificing sleep, grades, anything like that that we think would be affecting our lives at school negatively for certain things, because it's just not worth it. And I know that might sound a little bit bleak, but the truth is there are so many great people who are working on these issues. Like, I've never spoken to the three of you before, and now here we are on this panel, and I'm hearing about all of these wonderful things you guys have been doing. I have so much trust and faith that the work is going to get done and is getting done. And if one of us ever needed to take a step back, and we all do, we'd be able to, because there are so many great people out there just like us who are doing similar work. So I would say don't feel guilty for moving on from something. Feel grateful for the experience that you had and learn how to apply those skills and lessons elsewhere. And it's totally fine to take a break and move on. And it's actually a really good skill to learn. And I would say that's definitely been the hardest part of my journey, is learning when to move on. But now that I can sort of feel that out more, I feel a lot more confident in my decision-making skills. And I feel like I've just become a better person all around, because I know my limits and I know my needs, and I can be vocal about those. And that just makes me so much better at this work in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of concludes our the scripted section, our previous questions. So now we're going to go ahead and answer some questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask a question, and then if you just, feel called to answer this one, we can just hop on, and then I can move on to the next if anybody else wants to answer, or I can ask another audience question. So we are going to start with kind of a loaded one. How do you deal with people who actively and sometimes aggressively oppose your efforts to promote positive change? Anyone have any experience with that? I know I do. All right, I'll go ahead. I think, am I the only one here from the American South? I want to say that I am. All right. So I live in Forsyth County, Georgia. And if you've seen those videos on the internet of like really, really angry parents at school board meetings, and you're just like, what are they so angry about? And why are they so just like, there's so much vitriol? Chances are one of them is probably from my area. So actually, the final school board meeting that I was able to speak at, right after I moved into college, I drove back to coming from Athens, just for, one last kind of saying, please don't get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion programming. This is important to so many students here. This isn't critical race theory. We just want to build and cultivate an environment where everybody feels accepted, and not just accepted, but really welcomed and loved for every aspect of their identity and who they are. As I was leaving to go to my car to drive back home, there was a man just like yelling at me, calling me like a psychopath, asking me if I was happy with what I had done, telling me, something, I don't recall what, something was all my fault and I had messed everything up. And it's just, that can be difficult, but it's just, you kind of have to realize that people aren't angry at you. They're angry because of the information that they've been fed about, what you believe in. They don't not like you. They don't like what you believe in. But if you, have faith in your beliefs and you believe that what you're doing is the right thing, then that's all you can do. But as far as safety, that's definitely a serious issue. And I made sure to be walked back to my car by a police officer after that one, and keep my distance from Forsyth County for a month or two. So that's my story. Moving on, do any of you see yourselves making careers out of activism?
I do, honestly. So I've started my bachelor in international relations and organizations. And before, like maybe a year ago or something like that, I was really interested in diplomacy, and I still am. But since I got even more involved in advocacy and activism, I've started thinking of actually shifting to this field. And I feel with ADL and EUGS and all the organizations that I've worked with, I have heard from and collaborated with some great people who are doing exactly what I'm passionate about. And it's an environment where I feel some changes are done, although it's a battle. I know it's a battle, but I feel like some changes are even more impactful than maybe what I would have wished to do a year ago. So I am considering going into activism. I know it's a battle and I know it's hard, but I've started considering it.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. Kind of in that vein, who is your greatest inspiration in your activism and why? It could be a public figure, it could be a mentor that you've had, anything like that. Asher, it seems like you're thinking on that. Do you want to start us off?
I Sure. I mean, I know I said it was all because of Parks and Rec at the start, but I would say that the biggest the biggest supporters I've had have been my friends, whom I'm really grateful for, just because within my school community, a lot of this work in the context of schools, and it's not something I think we've touched on yet, is relationships within those places and just being a good community member in terms of talking to people, just getting to know everyone. Like with our phone banks for Political Action Club, a lot of it is telling people like, hey, we're going to be in this common space at 12:15 p.m. on Friday. We're serving pizza. You guys should come by if you're interested. It's just having those conversations. So I would say the biggest supporters I've had throughout this process have been my friends at school, because they've helped me spread the word about things I'm passionate about. They've helped me set up events, and it's really just relying on the people to get the word out about things you care about.
Yeah, definitely. And that relationship building aspect is so important, especially since
Yeah.
Julia, I think you mentioned something about this. This work is not it's not hierarchical. Like nobody's in charge and nobody's under anybody else. So that's why it's kind of so important to build those, community type spaces where everybody really feels celebrated and part of a team, and it's work, but it's fun too. You build friends, you build relationships, you eat pizza, whatever. So how do all of you kind of balance change making work with schoolwork? I know none of us like that sometimes, but it's a challenge we all have to face. So, anybody have any thoughts? Julia, why don't we head to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to figure that out. I have like a lot of physics that I have to get to after this. I think, and this is something that if I am passionate about something, can give a lot to it. So what I have tried to do is try to find meaning in the work that I'm able to do through school, in whatever lessons I can, trying to connect it to stuff I'm interested in. I think that's something that's always been something that I've really liked, and I have always loved the academic part of activism. So there are some classes, again, that are easier to draw meaning from than others, but part of it is like, I think we've heard this before, but you do have to get that work done eventually. So being efficient with time, prioritizing, there's skills you got to acquire, and I'm still working on them.
Yeah, physics. I'd like to see how you connect that one to activism, or if that's just something you got to muscle through. Because oh gosh, I don't want to be back doing physics. Asher, sounds like you had some
Yeah, I would
thoughts.
say with this, I think this also connects to where the adults in your life come into supporting you, especially at schools and even on like the legislative level. Like I know there are states that are working on, and student groups actually are lobbying state legislatures to give a day off school for civic engagement and things like that. Like Virginia, I think, just passed a law in
Virginia.
July saying that students can get a day off school for being civically engaged in one way or another. And I think students pushing for things like that. I think starting clubs at school, like keeping it very school oriented so teachers are more understanding, and also getting them involved. Like if you have an initiative that you feel passionate about, include the teachers too, like they care about these issues too. Invite them, give them a break from their work too. Allow everyone to be a part of it. And in turn, it'll help your work-life balance.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the interesting thing with students and teachers, especially in the US, it's like teachers can't really like encourage that sort of thing because it could be seen as, partisan or taking a side. So it's this weird dynamic where it's really like up to us to say at first, like, hey, I'm really interested in the fight against climate change. You're my environmental science teacher. I'm assuming that maybe you might also be interested in this. Would you like to sponsor my club? Lobbying for green energy initiatives, and things like that. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting part of being, kind of a young activist and specifically a public high school in the United States. Definitely a unique experience. Let's think. Another question from the audience. Can any of us talk about how intersectionality plays a role in the work that you've done in your community? I know that's kind of a big topic these days.
I mean,
I
sure.
can like
Sorry for it.
no.
Daria, let's
Okay,
go.
thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, in my case, it was bringing a topic in my NGO, which was anti-Semitism, because there is a lens, like there's an angle for everything. If you want to talk about anti-Semitism and correlate that to gender equality, or we did that with my organization, and we talked about anti-Semitism and the history of the Jewish people in Romania. So intersectionality is definitely a very important topic for me, because I try to be to bring that forward as much as possible. And there are initiatives in most organizations, so even Jewish organizations have, for example, women groups that help women support each other. So intersectionality is definitely something big for me. And I can proudly say that just by talking to your people and your groups and presenting this idea of, okay, maybe let's share with our public this topic which affects us and affects me as part of our group, could be very useful, because there's definitely someone else, like in like followers or people that are part of our public, that are going through what I'm going through, and that would be so helpful for them to hear about a certain issue through a different lens that is not necessarily presented in the mainstream media or in the mainstream field.
Yeah, absolutely. Asher, love to hear your take on this one.
Yeah, I mean, similar to Darian, here we are at an Anti-Defamation League panel. I think it's fitting to sort of talk about this because a lot of my work I've focused on my Jewish identity and what that means in terms of this space, like working on things like Jews for Joe or working on Anti-Defamation League initiatives. A lot of it is very personal because this is such a big identifier, and I live in a very Jewish community, and a lot of it is knowing your audience. So figuring out who lives around you, what issues do they care about, what can you relate to, and then go from there. Because like when we were talking about areas where we wanted to do a lot of like voter outreach, we immediately thought of South Florida because those are, swing counties, but they also have a huge Jewish population. And as a young person and as a Jewish person, I felt comfortable creating initiatives that would connect us with older Jewish voters. And we have that sort of duality of being, yes, connecting young and old, but also all being Jewish and having that common identifier. So a lot of it is sort of knowing your audience and finding connections and then going from there in terms of building up ideas and initiatives.
Yeah, so, going off of that idea of outreach, what kind of platforms do you find the most effective for engaging fellow students in this work? I'll actually start with this one because this is a fun question for me. I'm a social media type gal, love that work. So when I was working for the runoff elections with now senators Warnock and Ossoff, they were just candidates then. We ended up doing a lot of our outreach on TikTok, which was not a platform that like serious candidates had used really before this election cycle. So it was all very foreign to our bosses who were, in their 30s. They were like, what is this? What are you doing? This is supposed to like help us? What? How? So, they recognized that was kind of maybe an area that them and all of their political savvy, despite that, they did not really understand. So they just kind of handed it over to us, a bunch of teenagers and college students, and they were like, here you go, make the account. Don't post anything stupid, like good luck. And it just turned into like one of our biggest tools for engagement. And then they saw how successful, our Students For pages were. and they were like, hey, let's get John to hop on this. Let's make John a TikTok account himself. And I don't know if any of you have seen those videos, but to me, they are still the funniest thing on the face of the planet. I will forever be proud of being even a small part of bringing John Ossoff to TikTok. And it sounds silly, it sounds funny, but that work brought real results. We registered thousands of newly turned 18-year-olds who could not vote in the general election, who just turned 18 in December or January, to vote in the runoff. Youth turnout in Georgia was at the highest it's been, and that election, the outcome ended up kind of in the favor of our camp. But even if it hadn't, I think that getting that many young people engaged for their future is just, like I said before, that's a victory in itself. That's really all I could have asked for. So that was definitely an interesting new platform that I got to kind of explore this year. Anybody else have any thoughts?
So in my case, I use Instagram a lot, and it's a changing platform. Some say it's already a dying platform. And honestly, I don't know how to feel about that. I'm still attached to Instagram, and as an activist, I'm still attached to Instagram, not just as a person who posts stories and posts on her feed. Because the way you can post on Instagram and create content is definitely something special. It's not that special. You can do it on most platforms, but the way you can access a certain part of the population and of the people you would like to represent is really special. And it's not, usually organizations have Facebook pages, Instagram pages, TikTok not as much. So I feel like you're definitely groundbreaking in this regard. We're still trying to hack and find the key for TikTok, but Instagram is a way to go, especially with IGTVs. You can have guests over and guest speakers, but also create text posts with information. Once again, it's a love-hate relationship for me with Instagram as well, since most of my not so great interactions with people in the comment sections have happened on Instagram. And that, I think, goes back to your first question about violent interactions. Mine were usually on social media, just reporting every hateful comment full of slurs or whatever I could see and was addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And a big thank you to all of you for participating today. I think that was, a really rich and valuable discussion for me. I think that we've learned a lot from each other, and I hope that everyone watching has learned a bit too and found this just as enriching as I have. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Scroll down to find a list of ways that you can take action in the fight against anti-Semitism and hate. And be sure to continue checking out the amazing panels throughout the day tomorrow before Never Is Now comes to a close tomorrow evening. Have a good night.